The rain comes down in a fine silver mist over London, soft enough to blur the sharp edges of Buckingham Palace, but not enough to drive the crowd away. Phones glow like a field of tiny lanterns against the dark iron gates. A child presses his hand to the cold black bars, his breath fogging the metal as he whispers to his mother, "Are they really in there?" Somewhere beyond the stone facade, behind windows that have watched a century of wars and weddings, an old clock ticks in a private corridor. Footsteps echo on polished floors where generations of kings and queens have walked in silence before facing the world. Outside, bus engines growl, tires hiss on wet pavement, sirens cry in the distance. Inside, the walls hold other sounds, the low murmur of advisors, the crackle of old radio broadcasts, the remembered roar of crowds that once filled these streets not with cameras, but with flags and fear and hope. The House of Windsor stands still in the rain, caught between now and then, between empire and emptiness, between the weight of crowns and the judgment of a watching world. And if you wish to keep walking these echoing corridors of power and memory with us, you may linger, like, and subscribe, so that the next chapter of this unfolding story finds you when it is ready to be told. From smoke and gunfire, the birth of the House of Windsor. The first thing that reaches you is the sound, not the polite clatter of carriages or the distant peal of church bells that once marked a peaceful London morning, but the low, endless growl of war. In 1917, the city breathes in time with the front lines. Factory sirens wail before dawn. Hammers beat out a harsh rhythm on metal that will soon become shells and guns. Tram wheels shriek against rails slick with rain and grime. Somewhere above it all, the deep toll of Big Ben rolls through a gray sky stained faintly with coal smoke. The air smells of wet stone, engine oil, and a fear that no one has words for yet. In narrow houses along terrace streets, mothers smooth wrinkled letters with shaking hands. Their sons' words come from mud and trenches, dragged across Europe by the railways that now carry both hope and dread. A name appears again and again in the newspapers and on people's lips. German shells, German submarines, German planes that might one day, people whisper, even bomb London herself. Behind lace curtains, old families trace the shape of their surnames and wonder whether they sound too foreign now. In crowded pubs, someone makes a joke about spies and false names, and people laugh too loudly, because laughter is easier than panic. High above these streets, in a palace of polished stone and guarded gates, a different kind of unease hangs in the air. The building itself feels heavy with history. Paintings of long-dead kings stare down from the walls, their eyes fixed on a world they no longer know. The floors gleam from years of careful polishing, but today the footfalls crossing them are restless, quick. A messenger moves briskly down a corridor, the envelope in his hand still damp from the fog outside, the red seal unbroken yet full of things no one wants to read. He pauses at a door, takes a breath, knocks. Inside, King George V stands at a tall window, looking out over bare winter trees and the smoky roofs of London. The glass is cold to his fingertips when he touches it, tracing the faint pattern of condensation that has formed from the warmth of the room. He is not a man given easily to drama. He has the look of someone carved more than painted. Solid, controlled, his mustache neat, his bearing straight. Yet even he cannot escape the feeling that the ground beneath his feet is shifting. Behind him on a polished table lies a neat pile of newspapers. Their headlines shout in thick black ink, "Enemy advances," "Zeppelin raids," and in a smaller but still sharp type, "The German King." It is not the first time he has seen such words, but each time they sting with fresh force. For the British public, the word German is now stained with images of barbed wire, poisonous gas, and ruined villages. And their own royal family carries a name that is undeniably, uncomfortably German: Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. An aide clears his throat softly, breaking the king's thoughts. "Your Majesty, there have been further letters from the public, and from the cabinet." His voice is calm, but his eyes hold that same quiet tension that seems to live in every corner of the palace these days. George turns from the window. "More about the name?" he asks. He tries to keep his tone even, but the question feels strange in his mouth. A royal house, after all, is supposed to be above such things as fashion, public mood, and headlines. It is meant to endure, not adjust. The aide nods. "Yes, sir, there is concern. Some feel the name is becoming a danger to the war effort, to the crown itself." The king glances back at the newspapers, at the jagged lines of type that reduct. 1,000 years of monarchy to a single question about loyalty. He thinks of his cousins, the Kaiser in Germany, whose face now appears on posters as the enemy, and the Tsar in Russia, whose own throne is beginning to wobble under the pressure of revolution. Thrones are not unshakable, he realizes. Not anymore. Not in this age of artillery and pamphlets, of mass graves and mass opinion. In the cabinet rooms across town, the debate is sharper. The smell of tobacco hangs in the air, thick and stale. Papers rustle like dry leaves as ministers shuffle reports and telegrams. "We cannot ask men to die for a king who bears the same name as their enemy," one says, his fist tapping the table for emphasis. Whatever we may know about blood and family, the public sees the word Gotha and thinks of the bombers that strike from the sky. Another man leans back, the chair creaking faintly. "Names are not nothing," he says slowly. "They are banners, they are symbols. The Germans understand this, so must we." Through the window, he can see a line of women outside a shop, queuing for bread, their shoulders hunched against the cold. He thinks of the anger that grows in those lines, the whispers about profiteers, traitors, and those who do not share the common burden. Back at the palace, the royal children feel the edge of this storm without fully understanding it. In schoolrooms softened by the ticking of clocks and the murmur of tutors, they copy out English verses, trace maps of the empire, and sometimes catch a stray phrase from adults who forgot they were listening. "It will have to change," a voice says, cutting across the quiet one afternoon. "It's become dangerous, this business of sounding German." The word dangerous lands in the silence like a dropped weight. One evening, the king sits at his desk, the lamplight throwing a warm circle across the leather surface. Outside, the city glows faintly under the wartime blackout, only a few slits of light peeking through heavy curtains. He picks up a photograph, a younger version of himself in uniform, standing next to his cousins in their own glittering dress. They had once looked like the fixed points of Europe, these royal men with their medals and polished boots. Now, they seem more like pieces on a board being overturned by forces, none of them fully control. What does it mean, he wonders silently, to be a British king with a German name in a war like this? The question is not about vanity. It is about survival, not only his own, but the survival of an institution that stretches back through centuries of rebellion, restoration, and reform. He has seen what mobs can do when they decide that a crown no longer belongs on a human head. A knock at the door draws him back. Another advisor, another sheaf of papers. But this time, among the reports and the casualty lists, there is something else, a list of possible names. English names. Names rooted in the land, in castles, in rivers, in stone. Names that might wrap the monarchy in a new kind of armor, not of steel, but of language. The king looks down at the page. One word stands out, simple and strong. It evokes towers rising above the Thames, flags tugging in the wind, battles fought and won long before anyone had ever heard of trench warfare or machine guns. "Windsor," he murmurs, tasting the word as if it were a new oath. Outside, the wind rattles the palace windows, and somewhere in the distance, the faint boom of artillery rolls across the night like distant thunder. The old name still hangs over the royal house like a storm cloud, but for the first time, a different horizon appears, one built of stone walls, royal banners, and a single, solid English word. The choice has not yet been made, but the path toward it has already begun to take shape. The next morning, the city wakes under a low lid of cloud. Fog clings to the Thames, swallowing the far bank so completely that bridges seem to run from stone into nothing. On a street near the docks, a boy in a flat cap tosses a newspaper bundle onto a step, the pages flaring open as they land. A woman bends to pick it up, wiping her hands on her apron before folding the paper back into shape. Her eyes skim the war news, the casualty lists, and then settle on a small column that makes her frown. "Another Gotha raid," she murmurs. The word Gotha has become a kind of curse. It is linked to the huge German bombers whose engines drone like bees when they come over the coast, dropping destruction from a sky that once felt safe. She does not know that the same word hangs over the royal family, but she can feel in the way people spit the name out that it is heavier than a place or a plane. It is a symbol now of threat and fear. In the palace, the king holds that same word in his hand, but in another form. A memorandum, typed neatly, describes the growing anger over anything that sounds German. Street names are being changed. Shops with German owners have their windows shed, even dachshunds are kicked in the street. The words of one minister stand out on the page. The crown must be seen to stand with the people, not above them, and certainly not with their enemy. He looks up as Queen Mary enters the room. She moves with quiet purpose, the rustle of her skirts the only sound for a moment. Her face is composed, her eyes searching his. They have shared years of ceremony, of family life shaped around duty, of balancing their private fears behind public calm. "You have been thinking," she says softly, more statement than question. George nods, tapping the edge of the paper. They are pressing for a change. The name, our titles, everything that links us to Germany. They say it is necessary for the war, for the crown. She comes closer, her gaze falling on the list of names that lies beside the memorandum. Names of English houses, English places, English stones. "And what do you think?" she asks. He hesitates. "I think we are not what we were before this war. None of us. Not this country, not this family. Our blood ties across Europe have become chains instead of bridges. Whatever I feel about my German kin, the people here see only that their sons die while their king carries an enemy's name." He exhales slowly. "I will not have them doubt that I am theirs." Her hand rests lightly on the back of his chair. "Then we must choose a name that says that," she replies. "Not invented, not decorative, something rooted." Her eyes move to the word he had marked last night, the one that has tugged at his mind. "You are thinking of Windsor." He almost smiles. "You know me too well, Mary." "Windsor is strong," she says. "People know it. They have seen its towers from the river. It is not foreign. It sounds like the wind on the river and stone on the hill. It sounds English." A pause. "It sounds like a house that expects to stand for a long time." Down the corridor, their children are called into a small sitting room by a governess with a hushed urgency that tells them something serious is afoot. The young princes and princesses exchange quick glances. They are used to formality, to announcements framed as lessons. Still, today feels different. The air itself seems to listen. Their father stands before the fireplace, one hand behind his back, the other resting on the mantelpiece. The flames are low, more embers than fire, casting a faint glow on the framed photographs above. He studies his children's faces, some still round with childhood, others already sharpening with youth. The future of the monarchy is here in these gazes, curious and wary. "We are at war," he begins, his voice even, "not just with armies but with ideas, suspicions, fears." He explains in simple terms that their family carries a name many now hear as belonging to the enemy, that this is not fair perhaps and not true to who they are, but it is real and it matters. "We are not Germans," he says quietly. "We are British. This is our home, our country, and our duty. To make that clear, we shall take a name that comes from this land, from our own ancient hall. From today, we shall be the House of Windsor." The words fall into the room like a stone into a still pond. Ripples of thought move across young faces. One child repeats the name under his breath, testing it. "Windsor." It feels short, solid. Another frowns, thinking of the old, longer name that sounded like a storybook lineage. Does this mean we were not that before? The question stays unspoken, but it hangs there all the same. In government offices, the news is quickly set into the rigid shape of official language. Drafts of the proclamation go back and forth, ink correcting ink. Henceforth, one line reads, "Our house and family shall be styled and known as the House and Family of Windsor." Typewriters clack, stamping the new reality into paper. Clerks roll documents, slip them into envelopes, tie them with string. A machine that extends from palace to parliament to press begins to turn. The announcement, when it comes, spreads through London like a fresh gust of air. In pubs and factories, in offices and barracks, people lean over newspapers to read it. There is surprise, certainly. Some mock the idea, others cheer it. One soldier in a muddy dugout on the Western Front writes home, "Seems the King's gone all English in name as well as heart. House of Windsor they're calling them now. Sounds right to me. Maybe the old ways can change after all." For many, the name is less important than food on the table or news from the front. But on a quieter level, something subtle shifts. The monarchy has moved, not in geography but in symbolism. It has stepped closer to those it rules, at least in the language it uses about itself. Inside the palace, however, the change is not without pain. German princes and dukes related to the king find their British titles reviewed, questioned, sometimes stripped away. Letters cross Europe, full of wounded pride and cold anger. Cousins who once wrote as family now write as strangers divided by war. How quickly, one might say, names are cast off when they become inconvenient. George feels the sting of this most acutely when he thinks of his cousin Nicholas in Russia, the Tsar, whose empire is already shaking. Reports speak of strikes, mutinies, crowds in the streets. Another crown, another dynasty that once seemed eternal, now tottering on the edge of collapse. He knows that if revolution can devour a Romanov, it can certainly turn its gaze on a Windsor. Late one night, he stands again at the window, looking out over a dark city where only a few lamps burn, shaded by blackout rules. Somewhere beyond his sight, railway stations echo with the footsteps of departing soldiers. Hospital wards glow dimly over rows of bandaged bodies. The House of Windsor is, officially, only months old. Yet already it feels as if it has been forged in fire. He presses his palm to the cold glass, feeling the separation between himself and the people whose faith he must hold. A new name has been chosen, a new banner raised. But war is far from over and other storms are gathering, revolutions abroad, grief at home, and the slow, relentless crumbling of an empire that no new name can fully hold together. In the silence of that moment, with the city breathing uneasily below, one thought pushes through all the others. Have we done enough to survive what is coming? The war ends not with a single shout, but with a long, shaky exhale. On an autumn morning in 1918, church bells that once tolled for funerals ring instead for peace. The sound spills over rooftops, down narrow lanes, through factory yards where machines fall silent for the first time in years. Men in uniform stand bewildered in the streets, some laughing, some crying, some too tired to do either. Women hang out of windows, waving scraps of fabric as makeshift flags. London feels lighter, but only at first glance. Beneath the cheers lies a different landscape. Hospitals are full. Entire streets have lost sons. Lists of the dead continue to grow even after the guns fall quiet. And as soldiers trickle home, the empire they fought for shows faint cracks. In distant colonies and dominions, Canada, Australia, India, South Africa, voices have changed. They are still loyal, many of them, but they are also more certain of their own strength, their own identity. Winning a war has not preserved the world as it was. It has broken the seal on a world that will not stay the same. At Windsor Castle, the name that has now become the royal family's banner is chiseled into stone, added to documents, spoken in ceremonies. The castle itself looks timeless, solid walls, high towers, flags snapping in the wind. But inside, life is stamped with the same grief that shadows homes across the country. In a quiet room, Queen Mary opens a box filled with letters from mothers and widows. Some thank the royal family for their visits to hospitals, their words in speeches. Others ask for something more personal, a photograph signed by the king, a word of comfort, an acknowledgement that their son's name reached the highest house in the land. She runs her fingers over the ink where one woman has written, "He died saying he was proud to serve his King of England. Please do not forget him." George reads some of these letters late at night. They sit in small stacks on his desk, between reports on demobilization and debates about how to rebuild. He feels the weight of each one. This is the bargain of monarchy in a modern age. If you ask men to die in your name, you must, in some way, carry their memory. The House of Windsor is not just a new label on an old crown. It is a promise, one that must be kept in the face of unemployment, hunger, and anger that the peace has not delivered what the war seemed to demand. In the streets, men who have seen too much stand in lines for work that does not exist. The empire is large, but its wealth is strained. Industries struggle to shift from making guns back to making goods. Is this what we fought for? Someone mutters in a queue that snakes around a block. Newspapers now print not just war maps, but headlines about strikes, inflation, and political upheaval in Europe. The Russian Tsar has fallen. The Romanovs are dead in a basement room. That fact hangs in the air like a warning. Inside the royal circle, the execution of Nicholas II is more than a news item. It is the violent end of a cousin, a friend, a fellow monarch. George feels it as a personal blow and a professional omen. If one crown can be battered off a head, others can follow. He understands now, more clearly than ever, that survival will not come from pretending time has stood still. The young generation of the family grows up in this uneasy peace. At Windsor, boys in short trousers race along echoing corridors, their footsteps rebounding off stone. They tumble over each other in the grounds, rolling down grassy slopes that look out over the river. The war is a story they half remember and half absorb from the adults' silences, but they also sense the shift in mood when they leave the safety of the castle walls. On official visits, the Prince of Wales, Edward, walks through rows of veterans with empty sleeves and hollow eyes. He leans close, listening, charm glowing around him like a warm light. He jokes, claps shoulders, calls men old chap in a way that makes them feel for a moment less forgotten. Crowds love him. When he appears on a balcony, cheers rise with a force that surprises even those inside the palace. He seems to many like a bridge between classes, between past and future. Yet the future those crowds imagine is not simple. The post-war world hums with new ideas: socialism, nationalism, self-determination. Radios begin to find their way into homes, carrying voices directly from the palace to the living room. Technology is shrinking the distance between ruler and ruled, but it also gives people new ways to speak back. "They hear us now," a union man says in a smoky hall, gesturing to the cheap receiver on a table. "But we can hear them too. Let's see what they do with that." For the House of Windsor, these years are a delicate balancing act. The king opens parliaments, reads speeches he did not write, and presides over ceremonies designed to reassure. He also allows himself to be seen in ways earlier monarchs might have shunned, visiting factories, walking among the wounded, showing a human face to a role that once relied on distance and mystique. He is not a visionary. He is, at heart, a conservative man who believes in duty, order, and the slow, cautious adjustment of old forms. But history is moving faster than his instincts. While he works to anchor the monarchy in a new English identity, forces he cannot fully control are reshaping the ground: economic hardship, Irish unrest, independence movements abroad, a generation that remembers the trenches more than the coronations. At Windsor Castle one evening, as the sun slides down behind the trees and the stone turns gold, the royal family gathers on a terrace. The air is still, the river below catching the last light. From here the kingdom still looks solid, peaceful, eternal. A camera clicks as they pose, the king, the queen, their sons and daughter. It is an image meant to reassure. A family, a dynasty, a house with deep roots and strong walls. But behind the calm, one can sense the next fault line forming. The charming, restless Prince of Wales looks away for a moment, his gaze drawn not to the castle towers, but to the distant line of the city. He likes the noise, the music, the rush of modern streets, the adoration of crowds that feel more like fans than subjects. He understands the power of being loved in a way his father never did. He also feels the weight of expectation land on his shoulders like an invisible cloak. The House of Windsor has been born in smoke and gunfire, reshaped to survive a war and the hatred that came with it. But its greatest test will not be in the trenches or the cabinet rooms. It will come when crown and heart clash in one man's life, and the choice he makes sends shockwaves through the entire structure his father tried so hard to secure. The bells of Windsor chime the hour, the sound rolling over the darkening grounds. Inside, lights flicker on, one by one. A new age is coming, full of jazz, cinema, political upheaval, and a prince who loves freedom as much as he is meant to love duty. And somewhere in that gathering twilight lies the question that will define the next. What happens when the future king of the House of Windsor decides he does not want the crown at all? The king who never wanted the crown. The 1920s arrive in London not with a whisper, but with a restless, syncopated beat. Jazz pours out of small clubs and hotel ballrooms, the trumpet's sharp cry cutting through smoke and chatter. Motorcars honk and lurch along streets that once belonged to horse-drawn carriages. Women with bobbed hair walk with new confidence beneath street lamps. The city has buried the war as best it can beneath sequins, cocktails, and a determination to feel alive. Into this world steps a figure who seems made for the age, the Prince of Wales. He is no distant, stiff royal in heavy robes. He is slight, energetic, with quick movements and a boyish smile that seems to light up wherever he goes. We see him in a black-and-white newsreel, waving from the back of an open car, the wind tugging at his hair as crowds surge forward, arms outstretched. "Good old Prince of Wales," a man shouts, lifting his cap. Women lean out of windows, children sit on their fathers' shoulders, and for a moment the monarchy is not an institution. It is this man, this face, this voice. He spends little time rooted in any one place. He travels across the empire, moving through Canadian snow and Australian sun, shaking hands in Indian heat and South African dust. Everywhere he goes, the camera follows, capturing his easy laugh, his habit of leaning in close when someone speaks, as if their words are the only ones that matter. Veterans adore him because he visits hospital beds without flinching. Workers like him because he looks them in the eye. He dances, jokes, and stays up late, the music of the age in his ears. But behind the flashbulbs and cheers, there is another rhythm running through his life, one that only a few can hear. In quieter moments, back in rooms softened by heavy curtains and ticking clocks, the prince's shoulders slump. He complains of the endless routine, the speeches that all blur together, the expectation that he will move through life like a figure in a glass case. "I'm so tired of it all," he admits once to a close friend, the words dropping into the space between them like pebbles into a well. "Always on show, always for them, never for myself." His father, King George V, watches him with a mixture of pride and unease. In the king's study, with its dark wood and faint smell of tobacco, conversations about the heir are not bathed in adoring light. Ministers praise the prince's popularity, but some worry. "He is loved, certainly," one says, "but does he understand duty, the steadiness that will be required?" The king, who has hardened himself into the shape of his role over years of discipline, sees in his eldest son a spark that could either warm the monarchy or burn it. At family gatherings in the more intimate rooms of Windsor or Sandringham, the contrast between the brothers is clear. Edward, the Prince of Wales, is animated, hands moving as he talks, laughter quick and sometimes sharp. His younger brother, Albert, known as Bertie, sits straighter, quieter, his stammer tugging at his words when he is put on the spot. Where Edward seems to vibrate with restless energy, Bertie appears rooted, cautious, uncomfortable under sudden attention. Few would look at Bertie and see a future king. All eyes are on the charismatic older brother, the one the public cannot get enough of. The prince does not hide his distaste for some of the rituals that define his world. The formality of court, the stiffness of official dinners, the endless parade of dignitaries, these things weigh on him. He feels more alive in private houses in the countryside, where laughter runs more freely, where music plays late into the night, where the rules of rank blur at the edges. It is in this orbit, this world of salons and soirees, that a woman appears who will change the course of his life. Her name is Wallis Simpson, American, twice married, sharp-witted with a dry, cutting sense of humor that makes him laugh in a way people have not seen before. Their first encounters do not carry the weight of destiny. They are, at first, simply evenings with friends, shared jokes, a string of invitations. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she moves from being someone in the room to the person he looks for when he enters it. In a drawing room filled with soft lamplight and the clink of glasses, we see them in a corner, voices low. "You don't really like any of this, do you?" she teases, gesturing slightly at the room, at the hovering servants, at the sense that every gesture might be noted and repeated. He smiles, but his eyes are tired. "Would you if you were born into it?" he asks. She tilts her head. "I wasn't born into it. I chose my life. That's rather different." The words settle heavily between them. As months become years, their bond hardens into something more than friendship. Letters pass between them, full of private jokes and confessions that he cannot make to anyone else. He finds in her not only affection, but a kind of escape, a refuge from the demands of being the man who must someday be king. Those demands, however, do not sleep. The king grows older, his health weakening. His cough worsens, his energy drains. At his desk, George sometimes pauses over papers, his pen hovering as if weighed down by more than ink. He thinks of the future he will leave behind, and a concern begins to crystallize into dread. "After I am gone," he confides in a rare unguarded moment, "that boy will ruin himself within 12 months. The walls of the palace feel closer now, the corridors shorter. Conversations about the prince's private life become more urgent, more anxious. Priests, politicians, and courtiers murmur in corners about Mrs. Simpson. "It is not just that she is divorced," one says. "It is that she might be divorced again, twice divorced, American, and at the center of royal life. It would be unthinkable." Another nods grimly. "For a prince, perhaps; for a king, impossible." In public, nothing is said. The newspapers, bound by deference and pressure, hold their tongue. Photographs of the prince show him smiling, inspecting regiments, laying wreaths, playing the part expected of him. But in certain circles, the smoky rooms of clubs, the drawing rooms of the great houses, everyone knows. They watch him dance with Wallis, see the way he leans toward her as if the rest of the world has blurred into the background. They hear that he has had a special telephone line installed so he can speak to her more easily. They understand, with growing alarm, that this is not a passing infatuation. Then, as winter deepens in 1935 and the old year falters into the new, the shadow that has long lingered over the king's health finally darkens. George V lies in a quiet bedroom, the ticking clock louder now that conversations have dropped to whispers. Outside, snowflakes drift past the window, soft against the glass. Doctors move in and out, their faces grave. Family members come and go, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpets. The air smells faintly of medicine, and the smoke of a fireplace that has burned low. In one corner, Bertie stands with his wife, Elizabeth, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles pale. His thoughts are a jumble of grief and fear, for his father, for his family, and somewhere deep down, for what this will mean for all of them. Edward, when he enters, looks stricken, but there is also a restless agitation in him, as if he is pacing mentally even when his body stands still. The king's breathing is labored. At intervals, he opens his eyes, looking at the faces around him. He sees not only his sons and daughter, but the future of the house he renamed, the crown he tried so hard to anchor in new soil. At last, the moment comes when that burden must pass from his shoulders to another's. When George V dies in January 1936, the bells that toll across the kingdom carry a double note, mourning for the man and the first solemn recognition of his successor. Crowds gather outside palaces and churches, their breath white in the cold air. Newspapers print somber black-bordered announcements. In their headlines and on the lips of announcers, a new name is spoken with ceremonial weight: King Edward VIII. The man who never truly wanted to be king now wears the crown, at least in name. The House of Windsor has entered anew, one in which the battle will not be fought on foreign fields or in the trenches, but within the heart of the man at its center. And in the quiet, in a room that once offered him laughter and refuge, Wallis Simpson listens to the radio announcement, her face unreadable. Her name is not mentioned. It does not need to be. Those who know, know. Those who do not will soon. For now, the world hears only that a new king has come. It does not yet know what he is prepared to give up to keep hold of the one thing he has chosen for himself. Edward VIII begins his reign under skies that seem almost too clear for a January morning. The cold sun gleams off carriage wheels and palace gates, turning frost into silver. Crowds gather in thick coats and scarves, breath rising in pale clouds as they wait for a glimpse of the new king. When he appears, tall, elegant, impeccably dressed, the reaction is instant. Cheers roll across the mall like a breaking wave. Cameras click. Flags lift. For a moment, it feels as though the monarchy has stepped into a brighter, lighter future. But inside the palace, the light feels different, more fragile, more brittle. Edward walks through rooms that still carry his father's scent of tobacco and old paper. The corridors echo with footsteps of courtiers who watch him closely, uncertain whether to trust what they see or fear what they suspect. He moves like a man wearing a suit tailored for someone else, well enough to appear correct, but never comfortably, never naturally. On his desk lie the first red boxes of documents requiring a king's attention: military reports, diplomatic briefs, parliamentary concerns. He flips through them restlessly. "All this," he mutters once, "and none of it is life." The private secretary standing near the door pretends not to hear, but the words etch themselves into his memory. Edward wants something different from kingship, something more modern, more personal, more connected to the world he loves. He speaks of traveling more, of broadcasting directly to the people, of stripping away what he calls fusty nonsense. Some advisors nod politely, others exchange glances filled with quiet alarm. And beneath all of it, like a drumbeat beneath an orchestra, is the presence of Wallis Simpson. At official dinners, Edward's gaze drifts toward the empty seat that might, in another world, have been hers. In private residences, behind thick curtains and locked doors, she is very much present, pouring tea with steady hands, offering wry comments that make him laugh, listening while he vents his frustrations. Their conversations stretch late into the night, past the point when servants have banked the fires and dimmed the lamps. In one such room, warm with lamplight, quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside, Wallis watches him pace. His forehead is creased, his arms folded tightly. "They expect me to be my father," he says sharply, "to speak like him, to think like him, to bend myself into the shape of a man I never was." Wallis studies him for a moment. "And what shape are you?" she asks softly. He stops, looks at her. "Yours," he says. The words, tender yet dangerous, hang in the space between them. Unbeknownst to them, while they share these private moments, powerful figures across the kingdom are watching events with growing concern. In smoky newspaper offices, editors argue about whether the story can be printed. In Parliament, men pace hallways whispering about the problem. In bishops' residences, letters are drafted about morality, duty, and the sanctity of marriage. The American press is already running stories in bold, juicy headlines. Fleet Street pretends ignorance, but only barely. By spring, what was once a whisper becomes a low, constant hum. Courtiers notice the king avoiding certain ceremonies. Ministers notice his distraction during meetings, the way he glances at the clock as if counting the minutes until he can leave. The Archbishop of Canterbury notices the quiet panic rising among those who know what may be coming. Then comes the summer cruise, A holiday aboard a yacht in Mediterranean waters. Photographs leak. The king bare-chested on deck. Wally's beside him, elegant in wide-brimmed hats, laughter caught by candid cameras. The images sweep across papers in America and Europe, feeding rumors that have been building for months. When Edward returns to Britain, the silence around his private life is finally cracked beyond repair. In the palace, the atmosphere tightens. Meetings multiply. Voices rise. One advisor, usually calm, slams a folder shut and says, "He cannot marry her. It is unthinkable, unconstitutional. She is still married to another man. Even divorced once, she cannot be queen." Another counters, "But he will not let her go. Surely we all see that." The king's mother, Queen Mary, suffers quietly, her heart split between maternal love and royal duty. His brothers grow pale with worry. Bertie, especially, carries an invisible weight. He knows the crown will never fit him easily, and yet he begins to feel its shadow pressing onto his shoulders. Meanwhile, the king himself seems caught between two tides. In public, he performs his duties with a certain charm, though at times with an air of impatience. In private, he writes letters to Wally's filled with intensity and devotion. "I cannot live without you," he declares. "I will do anything to keep you." The crisis breaks open in early December 1936, when Wallis, under immense pressure and fearing she will be blamed for destroying the monarchy, flees to France. There, in a quiet house outside Cannes, she sits alone in a room filled with suitcases and silence. She picks up the telephone again and again, then sets it down without dialing. Reporters swarm outside. She reads the newspapers. She hears the radio broadcasts. She sees what she has become, not merely a woman, but a symbol of a constitutional earthquake. Back in London, the king is inconsolable. He cannot eat. He barely sleeps. Ministers arrive in grim lines to inform him that the government and the empire will not accept Wallis as queen. The king listens, jaw set, fingers tapping the arm of his chair. When they finish, he speaks with a stillness that unsettles the room. "If I cannot marry the woman I love," he says, "I shall abdicate." No one breathes for a moment. The machinery of state moves swiftly after that. Documents are drawn up, statements drafted, radio announcements prepared. Bertie is informed and his face goes white. He never says the words aloud, but they hang behind his stammer. "I am not ready. I am not meant for this." At last, the day comes when Edward must address the nation. It is December 11, 1936. The microphones stand before him like cold sentinels. He adjusts them with trembling hands. The room is so quiet he can hear his own heartbeat. When he begins to speak, his voice carries something the people have never heard from a king before: vulnerability. "I have found it impossible," he tells them, "to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love." All across Britain, in homes small and grand, families freeze. The words echo through radio cabinets and into living rooms where fires burn low. Some listeners are silent, others are shocked, some weep, some curse. The world tilts. By the next morning, he is no longer King Edward VIII. He is simply the Duke of Windsor. And his brother, the quiet, hesitant, dutiful Bertie, becomes King George VI. As Edward leaves Buckingham Palace for the last time, he pauses on the steps. The cold air stings his face. Behind him, the palace looms, an inheritance he has chosen to give away. Ahead lies a life of exile, controversy, and love. He steps forward without looking back. The House of Windsor has survived, but not unchanged. The crown has passed to a man who never sought it, a man with a stammer, a man with dub. T.S., a man who must now lead an empire already trembling with tension. And as the abdication dust settles, a storm far more devastating approaches. A storm that will drag the world back into war and test the new king in ways no one could yet imagine. The first time the new king speaks to his people as their sovereign, his words catch in his throat. The room is small, padded to soften echoes. heavy with the smell of hot wires and dust from the radio equipment. The microphone stands alone on the table, a strange metal flower on a stalk. Outside, London moves as usual, omnibuses rumbling, footsteps on pavements. But inside, time seems to hold its breath. George VI sits with his notes in front of him. His hand trembles slightly as he smooths the pages. He has rehearsed, again and again, with his speech therapist, with his wife at his side, in empty rooms where only the wallpaper listened. But practice cannot erase the memory of childhood struggles, of words that refused to come when called, of eyes that turned away in embarrassment. Now the words he must say are not trivial. They are the words of a king. They are meant to bind a wounded nation to him, to reassure them that their throne has not been left empty or unstable. The House of Windsor must sound strong, even if he does not always feel that way inside. The engineer gives a small signal. It is time. He leans forward. His voice, when it emerges, is careful, measured. There are pauses where he wrestles with a consonant, moments when he closes his eyes briefly as if pushing the sentence forward with his whole body. But the meaning is clear. He speaks of duty, of his surprise at finding the crown on his head, of his promise to serve. In living rooms across Britain, people lean closer to their sets. They hear the hesitations, they hear the effort. But because they have lived through their own struggles, war, loss, hardship, they hear something else too: sincerity, humanity. A man trying his best, not a flawless symbol gliding above them. "That's our king now," one factory worker says quietly after the broadcast ends. Sounds like he knows what it is to fight for something. His wife nods. "At least he wanted to stay," she replies, thinking of the brother who left. The years that follow seem to rush forward. Europe darkens. Dictators shout from balconies. Armies march in rigid lines across radio news bulletins. The new king finds himself standing in the same kind of storm his father faced, but this one will be even more brutal. When war is declared in 1939, the king's voice is again carried to millions. This time, the weight is almost unbearable. He speaks of grim days ahead, of sacrifice, of a cause that must be held to, no matter the cost. Somewhere in the background of that broadcast, the ghosts of 1914 stir. But this is not the same world, and he is not the same kind of king. Bombers do not just threaten distant fields, they strike directly at the heart of his capital. The Blitz turns London nights into a flickering horror of searchlights and flame. Sirens wail. Children are carried down into underground stations, where they sleep on platforms, the air thick with dust and bodies and whispered fear. The House of Windsor does not flee. Advisors urge the royal family to leave London, to relocate permanently to the countryside, or even to Canada, where they would be safe from bombs. The king and queen refuse. "The children will not go without me," the queen says firmly. "I will not go without the king, and the king will never leave his people." The words spread quickly, repeated in papers and pubs, in shelters and canteens. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate hardly matters. The effect is real. People feel less abandoned. One day, Buckingham Palace itself is bombed. Windows shatter. Walls crack. Dust fills the air. The blast throws plaster across polished floors. In the aftermath, the king and queen walk through their damaged home, stepping over broken glass, their faces pale but set. "I am glad we have been bombed," the queen is reported to have said. "Now we can look the East End in the face." She knows that the poor districts have suffered beyond measure. Now, at least, the palace bears scars too. In those years, the image of the monarchy changes again. The king is still a symbol, still dressed in uniform, still appearing on balconies and in factories. But he is also a husband and father trying to protect his family, a man listening to sirens at night, a human being sharing, in his own way, the danger that millions endure. His daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, grow up with gas masks as part of their world, with sandbags around famous buildings, with blackouts and rationing. Princess Elizabeth the Elder watches her father closely. She sees how the strain carves lines into his face, how he sometimes rubs his chest as if something heavy sits there. She also sees how he stands straight when he must, how he speaks when he is afraid, how he carries on because there is no other choice. These years leave a mark on her she will never shake. When the war finally ends in 1945, the celebrations are wild and fierce. Crowds fill the streets again, as they did in 1918, but this time with an even deeper tiredness behind the joy. People climb lamp posts, embrace strangers, sing until their voices crack. On a balcony at Buckingham Palace, the king, queen, and their daughters look out over a sea of faces. In the crowd, a young woman in plain clothes smiles with secret delight. Princess Elizabeth has slipped out herself for a time, mingling with the people whose lives are tied to hers by more than ceremony. The victory, however, comes with a cost that is hard to count. Britain is exhausted, bombed, in debt. The empire, while technically intact, has shifted. India presses hard for independence. Other colonies murmur their own desires for self-rule. The House of Windsor presides over a realm that still stretches across oceans, but the bonds are fraying. The king feels it in his bones, even as he attends victory parades and gives thanks. His health falters. Years of smoking, stress, and war wear him down. In private, he coughs more, walks less easily, looks older than his years. Elizabeth, now a young woman with serious eyes and a strong sense of duty, begins to take on more tasks in his stead. In 1947, she marries Philip Mountbatten, a naval officer with his own tangled ancestry of Greek and Danish royal lines. Their wedding offers a brief, shining moment of hope. The nation, still on rationing, saves coupons for her dress. The radio carries the music of Westminster Abbey into homes where wallpaper peels from damp and food is still scarce. "At least we can celebrate something," someone says, looking at the pictures in the paper. Yet beneath the lace and trumpets lies a quiet understanding. The life Elizabeth is stepping into will not be like other lives. Her father's health is failing. The world is changing. She will not simply be a wife and mother. She will inherit a crown that is both heavier and less secure than ever before. By the early 1950s, the king is visibly unwell. When Elizabeth and Philip set off on a tour of the Commonwealth in 1952, they do so partly because he cannot. At an airport, she kisses him goodbye. The cameras capture a tender, ordinary gesture between father and daughter. They do not capture the unspoken fear that it might be their last meeting. In Kenya, under a canopy of trees alive with birdsong, Elizabeth spends a night at Treetops, a lodge built high in the branches. She goes to sleep as a princess. In a small house in England, her father's heart fails. The news travels by telegram and wireless across continents and oceans. A messenger hurries up a path in the African heat, sweat on his brow, urgency in his steps. The scenery is lush and green, the air carrying the scent of earth and leaves. The moment he delivers the message, the world tilts. Elizabeth does not scream. She does not collapse. Those around her will later remember her quiet, stunned composure, the way her eyes filled with tears that did not fall. In one breath, she has lost a father. In the next, she has become queen. The House of Windsor has passed through war, scandal, abdication, and fire. Now, the crown rests on the head of a young woman whose reign will unfold not over an empire, but over its remains. And as her plane takes off from African soil to carry her back to a grieving nation, clouds gathering at the horizon, a new question sharpens in the air. How does a monarch rule in a world where the empire is disappearing, and a new, uneasy age is rising in its place? Elizabeth II, a crown at the end of the world. The engines hum like a steady, muted drum beneath the floor of the aircraft as it cuts through the African sky. Inside, the light is thin, filtered through small oval windows. Elizabeth sits by one of them, looking out at clouds that look almost solid, like the backs of sleeping animals. She is dressed simply, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. The news sits between her and the horizon, invisible but immense. When she left London, She was a daughter on a royal tour, a young wife, a princess carrying out duties on behalf of her ailing father. Now, somewhere between the trees of Kenya and the gray skies of Britain, she has become the central figure in a story that suddenly feels much older than she is. Those around her show their grief in quiet gestures, a lowered voice, a hand placed gently on her shoulder, averted eyes when they think the weight of their gaze might be too much. Philip watches her with a mix of sorrow and protective resolve, understanding that any attempt to shield her from the truth is already too late. The crown is not a future possibility anymore. It is a present reality, and it is already shaping the air they breathe. As the plane descends toward London, the landscape shifts from expansive savanna and cloud to patchwork fields and river bends to the dense sprawl of a city that has seen too many processions of mourning and hope. On the tarmac, ministers and officials wait in dark coats, their hats held against the wind, faces set in lines of protocol and genuine sorrow. Cameras are positioned, microphones stand ready. They know that the images captured today will be replayed for years, pinned to memory as the moment a new era began. When Elizabeth steps down onto British soil, the wind pulls slightly at her black dress and veil. Her expression is composed, but there is a shadow in her eyes that was not there before. She moves forward not as a young woman returning home, but as a queen arriving to take her place. In that subtle difference lies the entire transformation of her life. Inside the walls of the palace, the grief is both personal and political. Rooms that recently echoed with the strained but steady voice of George VI now hold only the ticking of clocks and the murmur of attendants. Elizabeth greets her mother, her sister, members of the family, each embrace carrying a double weight, the loss of a man they loved and the silent acknowledgement that everything has changed. Her mother looks at her not just as a daughter, but as a sovereign. Margaret, younger and less encumbered, clings a moment longer than protocol would recommend, as if trying to hold on to the last fragment of the life they once shared. Soon there are papers to sign, formal words to be spoken, oaths to be taken. The machinery of monarchy, honed over centuries, closes around her like a perfectly fitted cage. She chooses her regnal name quickly, Elizabeth II. There is a deliberate continuity in it, a link back to the first Elizabeth, who ruled over England at the dawn of empire and global exploration. Now the second Elizabeth will reign as that empire unravels, its territories slipping away like sand between fingers. The coronation comes the following year in 1953, but its preparations begin almost at once. Westminster Abbey, its stones stained dark by age and London soot, is measured and planned as if it were a stage for a grand, sacred theater. Tailors, jewelers, clergy, soldiers, choir members, all are drawn into the elaborate choreography of ritual. The crown will be placed on her head before dignitaries from across the world, a spectacle designed to project continuity, majesty, and the impression that, despite everything, Britain still stands at the heart of something vast. On the day itself, rain streaks gently down stained glass windows while television cameras, new guests in the ancient abbey peer from tucked-away positions. The air inside smells of incense, candle wax, and the faint must of old stone. Choir voices rise and fall in waves. Elizabeth processes slowly up the aisle, the train of her gown carried carefully by pages, the weight of expectation walking beside her step for step. She knows that millions are watching on flickering black and white screens in cramped living rooms, in village halls, in far-flung corners of the Commonwealth. For many, this is the first time they have seen such a ceremony not as ink on a newspaper or a photograph days later, but moving, breathing, unfolding before their eyes. When she kneels, when oil is placed on her head in a moment shielded from cameras, something intensely private and ancient crosses with something intensely public and modern. The words of the oath bind her to a vision of duty that her father embodied in quieter ways. "My whole life," she once promised on her 21st birthday, "whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." Now, that promise becomes not just a personal vow, but a legal and spiritual anchor. Yet even as trumpets sound and crowds cheer outside, the world in which she will reign is already shifting. Flags are being folded in distant capitals. In New Delhi, in Accra, in Kuala Lumpur, in countless cities far from London, people discuss constitutional changes, independence dates, new national anthems. The sun has not yet fully set on the British Empire, but it is close to the horizon, and no crown, no matter how heavy with jewels, can halt its descent. Elizabeth understands this in a practical way more than a philosophical one. Her red boxes begin to fill with news of constitutional conferences, independence negotiations, and the delicate work of transforming an empire into a commonwealth of equal nations. She signs documents granting sovereignty, listens to advisors debate the pace and manner of decolonization, and steps onto tarmacs in newly independent countries where crowds now greet her not as an imperial ruler, but as a guest, a symbol of a shared past that is being carefully, sometimes painfully, redefined. In Ghana, she dances with President Kwame Nkrumah, the cameras capturing her smile, his steady poise, the swirl of the moment. To some, it is a gesture of reconciliation and respect, proof that the crown can adapt. To others, both in Britain and abroad, it is a reminder of power once unquestioned and now gone. The House of Windsor must walk a line between honoring the past and not being trapped by it, between projecting dignity and acknowledging that its role is no longer to command, but to represent. At home, the changes are just as stark. Post-war Britain is rebuilding itself not only in brick and concrete, but in spirit. Tower blocks rise where rows of bombed terraces once stood. The welfare state, created in the wake of war's shared suffering, reshapes the relationship between citizen and government. The world is moving toward television, youth culture, rock music, consumerism. A coronation that felt timeless in 1953 begins to look, even a decade later, like an image from another age. Through it all, the figure at the center of the House of Windsor remains remarkably constant. Elizabeth cultivates a steadiness that is almost its own message. Her voice, in Christmas broadcasts, is calm, measured, clear. Her wardrobe, orderly and modest, becomes a quiet kind of armor. She rarely reveals her inner thoughts. Her public face is one of composure, restraint, and an almost stubborn dedication to routine. In an age of rapid change, she chooses not to chase the whirlwind, but to stand in its center, holding to a vision of monarchy as service and stability. For some, this is comforting. For others, it begins to feel like distance. And as years pass, as one flag after another is lowered from colonial flagpoles, as new leaders rise and fall across the Commonwealth, a question gathers like slowly forming storm clouds. Can a monarchy remain relevant when the empire it once defined has dissolved into a different, more complicated network of nations, identities, and loyalties? The answer to that question does not come all at once. It comes in murmurs, in headlines, in television interviews, in shifting public expectations that move like tides, slow at first, then unmistakable. Elizabeth feels these changes not through dramatic confrontations, but through countless small moments that accumulate across the years. In the 1960s, cameras enter the palace in a way they never have before. The documentary Royal Family attempts to bring the Windsors closer to the people, showing them barbecuing, watching television, laughing in informal moments. For a brief time, it works. The public feels a fresh intimacy. But afterwards, something shifts. The mystique that once shielded the monarchy is thinner, more fragile. The documentary is quietly locked away, never to be broadcast again. A curtain once drawn back cannot be entirely closed. Meanwhile, the world outside becomes louder, sharper. Protests rise in streets from London to Johannesburg to Belfast. Wars are fought on television screens, not just in newspapers. Generations begin to question institutions simply because they exist. When young people look at Buckingham Palace, some see tradition worth keeping, others see a relic. Through all of this, the Queen maintains her steady pace, opening parliaments, visiting hospitals, traveling tirelessly across the Commonwealth. She becomes, over time, both everywhere and nowhere, a presence that is felt but rarely deeply understood. Her life is one of motion without change, while the world around her changes without pause. There are moments when she is drawn into history with sudden force. In 1969, Prince Charles's investiture as Prince of Wales is televised to millions. The ceremony is beautifully staged, full of ancient ritual blended with modern broadcast technology. Yet even in this triumphant moment, the tension of nationalism in Wales simmers beneath the surface. Protests erupt. Graffiti appears. 2 bombs explode in the months leading up to the event. The monarchy is not just a symbol of unity. It is a lightning rod for identity and anger. Still, the day proceeds. Charles kneels. The crown is placed upon him. His mother watches, her face composed, her expression unreadable. She knows that the world he will inherit is different from the one she stepped into, and that the crown may not sit as lightly on him as it did on her. Then in 1977, the Silver Jubilee arrives. The streets erupt in celebration, bunting, street parties, music spilling from pubs and parish halls. Children wave flags, grandmothers bake cakes, cameras capture smiles under bright summer skies. For a moment, it feels as though the monarchy has threaded the needle, modern enough to survive, traditional enough to anchor the national imagination. Elizabeth stands on the balcony, looking out at a crowd that stretches to the horizon, and feels a sense of continuity that almost overwhelms her. But jubilees are celebrations, they are not solutions. Behind palace walls, the strains of royal life grow more personal, more painful. Her sister Margaret's marriage deteriorates in the public eye. Rumors swirl like relentless gusts. The once close sisters drift apart under the press of duty versus personal freedom. The Queen loves Margaret deeply, but she cannot always protect her from the expectations that cage them both. Her children grow older. They face their own futures under the intense glare of cameras. Charles seeks meaning in environmental causes, in philosophy, in architecture, in roles that sometimes feel like awkward clothing he must tailor to himself. Anne grows fiercely independent, resilient, unbothered by public scrutiny. Andrew and Edward follow their own paths, ones that will, in different ways, test the family and the Queen more than she can yet foresee. Then, in 1982, a fragile peace is shattered again. Argentine forces invade the Falkland Islands. Britain prepares for war. Ships sail. Lives are lost. The Queen reads daily reports with the same calm gravity her father once did. She understands the sorrow of war in ways no leader in her country now remembers firsthand. Yet the decision is not hers. Constitutional monarchy demands restraint even in moments when emotion runs high. When victory comes, the country cheers once again. Flags fly, pride surges, but Elizabeth does not celebrate loudly. She thinks of the mothers who have received telegrams, the caskets carried off ships, the letters sent home from young men who expected to return and never did. The monarchy may be ceremonial, but grief has no constitutional limits. Then comes the turning point that will redefine everything. Diana. The world meets her first as a shy young woman stepping into a blaze of flashbulbs. The Queen sees her as a suitable match for Charles, sweet, gentle, photogenic, someone who could steady the future king's path. But what follows is something no one could control. The explosion of global celebrity, the transformation of a princess into a phenomenon. Elizabeth watches with a mixture of admiration and unease as Diana captivates crowds with her open laughter, her empathy, her touch. The public sees her as warmth incarnate. The monarchy, by contrast, begins to seem colder by comparison. The marriage crumbles. Everyone sees it. The photographs, the press leaks, the interviews. Each one peels back another layer of royal privacy until the institution feels raw and exposed. Elizabeth moves through these years with a sense of tightening caution, trying to hold the family together even as it splinters under the weight of misunderstanding, mismatched expectations, and the relentless press. And then, in 1997, comes the night that will haunt her forever. Paris, a tunnel, flashing bulbs, twisted metal. The Queen is at Balmoral when the news arrives. In the quiet rooms of that Scottish estate, far from the roar of London, she hears the impossible words, "Diana is gone." The next days become a pressure cooker of grief and fury. The nation mourns loudly and publicly. Flowers pile outside palaces. People weep in the streets. Meanwhile, the Queen stays in Scotland, trying to protect her grandsons from the storm of cameras, trying to decide what duty requires in a moment that feels like the shaking of the entire monarchy. Criticism rises swiftly. Where is the Queen? Headlines demand. Why is there no flag at half-mast? The monarchy, centuries old, suddenly seems out of step with a public that wants raw emotion, not stoic silence. When Elizabeth finally returns to London, she walks among the flowers and cards left outside Buckingham Palace. She reads the messages, touches the wilted petals, absorbs the grief like a weight pressed onto her shoulders. She then delivers a televised address, rare, personal, aching with sincerity, and the temperature shifts. The anger softens. The nation exhales. But Diana has changed something permanently. The monarchy must now answer to a world that expects openness, emotional resonance, transparency. A world shaped not by empire but by media, global culture, and personal narrative. In the aftermath, Elizabeth becomes more attuned to this new landscape. She adjusts carefully and incrementally. She modernizes the royal household. She allows reforms that earlier generations would have resisted. She listens. She learns. She evolves, slowly, steadily, but unmistakably. Through the 2000s, she becomes a kind of grandmother to the nation, not merely a sovereign but a symbol of endurance. Her partnerships with prime ministers, from Churchill to Blair to Brown, demonstrate a quiet adaptability. She remains steady while politics churns violently around her. And yet, beneath all the ceremony and calm, a persistent, almost whispered question lingers in the minds of commentators, citizens, and even some within the palace. How long can the House of Windsor rely on a single life to anchor its legitimacy? When Elizabeth crosses into her 8th decade on the throne, she becomes the longest-reigning monarch in British history. The world she entered as queen has vanished almost entirely. The empire is gone. Digital technology has rewired communication. Culture moves faster than any institution can track, yet she remains a still point in an ever-accelerating world. But even the stillest point must one day move. As the closes, Elizabeth stands on a balcony once more. The evening sun warms her face. Below, crowds cheer, not quite as wildly as they once did, but with deep affection. Beside her are the heirs to the future, Charles, William, George. 3 generations poised to inherit a role that may be more daunting now than ever before. Elizabeth does not smile often in public, but she smiles now faintly. She knows the truth. The next era will not be hers. It will belong to those who must answer a new question. If the monarchy survived the end of the empire, can it survive the age that follows? Cameras, cracks, and the ghost of Diana. The first flashbulb pops like a tiny explosion in the darkness, then another, then a dozen more. A wave of white light rolls across the pavement outside St. Paul's Cathedral as a young woman steps out of a car, her head lowered shyly beneath a blonde fringe. The air hums with restless energy. Crowds press forward until the police line bends like a living wall. Reporters shout questions. Shutters snap with insect-like rapidity. That shy young woman, Diana Spencer, lifts her face for a moment, and the world inhales. This is the beginning of something the monarchy has never fully faced, a force of charisma so powerful it becomes its own kind of sovereignty. Inside the cathedral, beneath the vast dome where voices echo like distant thunder, the wedding of Charles and Diana unfolds with all the grandeur 1,000 years of tradition can muster. Trumpets flare. Choir voices rise in perfect harmony. The Queen watches from her place, composed as always, the weight of duty carried lightly across her face. Charles stands solemn, careful, practiced. Diana, luminous in silk and lace, looks at once radiant and overwhelmed. Outside, the cheers rise to a pitch that reverberates through the stone itself. The fairy tale begins, tabloids declare, and for a time the nation and the monarchy join in that illusion, weaving hope into spectacle. But inside the House of Windsor, beneath the polished floors and the gilded ceilings, the foundations begin to tremble long before the first cracks appear in public. Part 1, approximately 700 words. The palace is never entirely quiet, even at midnight. Footsteps echo through its corridors, staff moving like shadows, their soft-soled shoes whispering across carpets. Somewhere, a door closes with a gentle click. In another wing, the distant rumble of a generator hums steadily, a sound that seems to vibrate faintly in the bones of the building itself. Diana lies awake in a room that feels larger than she does. Moonlight spills across the bedspread. The silence around her is not peaceful. It is cavernous, isolating. She is surrounded by portraits of queens and princes long dead, their painted eyes trained on her as if judging what she has yet to become. When she eventually sleeps, it is shallow, restless, interrupted by dreams of crowds pressing too close, of cameras bursting like fireworks, of footsteps that always follow but never catch her. Charles sleeps elsewhere, in a wing closer to his study, where shelves of books stand in neat rows and letters from confidants lie in careful stacks. His world is quieter, insulated, built of routine and expectations he has never managed to reshape into something resembling choice. Before bed, he reads a few lines from a book on architecture, a habit that calms him. Yet even as he turns off the lamp, his thoughts drift, not toward the woman the world calls his fairy-tale bride, but toward an older, steadier love that he has never fully surrendered. Under such tension, the marriage begins to strain almost from the moment it starts. Publicly, the couple is dazzling. They tour Australia, Canada, India. Crowds surge forward not for Charles but for the young woman whose smile seems to light up entire airports. She kneels to greet children. She touches the hands of the elderly. She laughs warmly, unguarded. Cameras devour her. Headlines worship her. Wherever she walks, the world follows. Privately, the palace machinery grinds. Diana struggles with the rigid protocols that define royal life. What to wear, what to say, when to appear, how to stand. She feels watched, assessed, corrected. Her attempts to share her inner turmoil are often met with silence or polite redirection. Loneliness grows in her like a shadow in the corner of a room, slowly widening. Charles, feeling eclipsed in public and misunderstood in private, retreats into familiar circles where Diana cannot follow. His frustration, her insecurity, their mismatched expectations, these forces collide in ways that bruise more deeply than any public slight. And still the cameras flash. Late-night talk shows joke about the newlyweds. Tabloids speculate endlessly. Photographers lurk in trees, in cars, behind fences. The line between public interest and intrusion dissolves entirely. Every gesture, every glance, every distant express. Sion is captured, clipped, magnified. Inside Buckingham Palace, the Queen watches all of this with growing concern. She is not blind to the tension between her son and his wife. She hears the whispers. She sees the strain etched into Diana's face and the defensiveness tightening Charles's posture. But she also knows the crown demands the appearance of unity. Marriage, like monarchy, is meant to be endured, not reshaped for comfort. Yet the world around them no longer shares this view. Television shows families who speak openly about their feelings. Newspapers gleefully pry apart every layer of royal privacy. A generation accustomed to candor begins to ask why the monarchy should remain a fortress of silence. By the late 1980s, the cracks become visible even to those who had refused to believe them. Diana steps out of a car one evening to attend a gala. The flashbulbs erupt. She walks alone. Charles arrives later, also alone. The headlines that follow are less like news and more like warnings. Something is fracturing. Something is unraveling. Something in the crown itself is breaking open. And beyond all this tension lies another force that neither the monarchy nor the media yet fully understand. A public that has fallen not just in love with Diana, but in allegiance to her. In the years to come, that allegiance will reshape the monarchy, challenge the queen, and test the very boundaries between personal tragedy and public duty. For now, the camera lights still glitter, the whispers still swirl, the facade still stands. But the ground beneath the House of Windsor has begun to shift, and the tremor is only the beginning. The storm does not break all at once. It builds slowly, headline by headline, interview by interview, silence by silence, until the air itself seems charged with inevitability. Diana walks through a hospital ward, her heels clicking softly on linoleum. The room smells faintly of disinfectant and something metallic, like the promise of rain on steel. She approaches a man lying alone, his eyes hollowed by illness the public still fears. Without hesitation, she takes his hand. The cameras flash, but for once the light feels gentle, almost reverent. In that single gesture, she does what no member of the royal family has yet dared. She breaks a barrier of fear around HIV/AIDS that has isolated thousands. The world takes notice. The public adores her even more. Inside the palace, the impact reverberates with complicated echoes. Some advisors praise her intuition, her courage, her ability to connect. Others bristle. Too independent, one whispers. Too unpredictable, says another. Too much attention, thinks Charles, though he rarely says it aloud. The image of the monarchy is slowly shifting around one woman, and its center of gravity is beginning to tilt. Diana, feeling unseen at home yet seen everywhere else, throws herself deeper into her charitable work. Minesweeping campaigns, hospital visits, homeless shelters. She brings warmth to spaces that feel forgotten by the state, and she meets people whose gratitude gives her a sense of purpose. But each step forward in public seems to widen the distance behind palace walls. She begins to understand that the monarchy is not one family but two. The one she sees on the balcony, smiling and waving, and the one in private, strained and fracturing under the weight of its own expectations. Late at night in Kensington Palace, she sits alone at a writing desk. The lamp casts a warm pool of light, yet the rest of the room feels cavernous. She writes letters, some to friends, some to charities, some that will never be sent at all. She writes to make sense of the growing ache inside her. She feels trapped between two worlds, the woman she wants to be and the role she is expected to play. The harder she tries to reconcile them, the more impossible it seems. Charles, meanwhile, seeks refuge in routines that feel familiar, in companions who understand the pressures he faces, in conversations that do not demand emotional transparency he has never been taught to give. His relationship with Camilla, steady, constant, quietly enduring, becomes a lifeline. To him, it is comfort. To the public, when they eventually learn of it, it will become betrayal. The press follows every movement of this widening gulf. Camera crews wait outside gyms, at the entrances to theaters, along country roads. Reporters trade rumors like currency, some true, others invented but irresistible. A flurry of tabloids arrives on breakfast tables daily, each one splashing speculation across its front page. The monarchy watches helplessly as private pain becomes the nation's entertainment. The Queen summons her son and daughter-in-law to discussions meant to restore calm. In drawing rooms upholstered in quiet tones, sage green, deep red, royal blue, she listens as the two speak without looking at each other. She asks questions gently but firmly. She avoids judgment. She tries, in her way, to steady tea. He ship, but she knows she cannot steer it for them. The monarchy is built on ritual and restraint. It has no vocabulary for emotional crisis. By the early 1990s, the silence becomes untenable. Diana's voice, long constrained, breaks through first. In 1992, the publication of Andrew Morton's book, fed by Diana's own recorded words, blows apart any illusion of marital harmony. Her struggles with mental health, her loneliness, Charles's infidelity, they are all laid bare. The monarchy reels. Newspapers explode with headlines so stark they seem carved in stone. Charles responds years later in a televised interview where he admits to his long-standing relationship with Camilla. The confession lands like a thunderclap. Public sentiment fractures. Some blame him. Others blame Diana. Many blame the institution itself. For the Queen, this is not just scandal. It is a constitutional crisis wrapped in intimate anguish. She feels the public's disillusionment like a cold draft through the palace halls. The House of Windsor is exposed, its weaknesses, its secrets, its human failings. In 1992, a year Elizabeth will later call her Annus Horribilis, Windsor Castle catches fire. Flames leap from ancient timbers. Smoke billows across the sky. Firefighters battle the blaze as priceless artworks are carried out by gloved hands. The Queen stands outside in a simple coat, watching the castle burn. The image becomes symbolic, a monarchy in distress, its walls, literal and metaphorical, crumbling under heat. Yet even then, no one imagines how much darker the story will become. Because somewhere in the near future, in a Paris tunnel lit by a smear of white headlights, the ghost of Diana will be born. And she will haunt the monarchy in ways none of them can yet understand. Paris glows at night like a chandelier, gold light on wet pavements, the distant hum of traffic, the murmur of late diners in sidewalk cafes. On the evening of August 30, 1997, the city feels restless, as if holding its breath. In the lobby of the Ritz, voices echo lightly off marble floors. A woman with familiar eyes and a weary smile walks quickly toward a waiting car, her partner beside her, security moving in tight formation. Diana wears no crown, no sash, no jewels, only a simple outfit and the quiet wish for a few hours of peace. But peace is the one luxury the world will not give her. Outside the hotel, the night erupts in flashbulbs. Cameras strobe across her face, burning the moment into the retinas of strangers. Photographers shout her name. Engines rev, tires squeal. The car door closes, sealing her inside a dark bubble where she exhales softly, tension coiling through her shoulders. Will they never stop? She murmurs, half to herself, half to the man beside her. The driver inches forward into the Paris night. They do not know the car behind them has already lunged ahead. They do not know the chase has begun. The tunnel looms ahead. Pont de l'Alma, dim, curved, indifferent. Traffic builds. Horns blare. For a few seconds the car gathers speed, engine growing into a low roar swallowed by the stone walls. Then impact. Metal screams, glass shatters, a sound like the world cracking open. In London, it is nearly dawn when telephones begin ringing. First whispers, then reports, then the blunt punch of confirmation. Diana has been in an accident. Diana is injured. Diana is gone. Buckingham Palace wakes to a silence so heavy it feels physical, pressing into every corridor, every room. Elizabeth, at Balmoral with her family, receives the news with the same stunned stillness she once had under Kenyan skies when she learned of her father's death. But this is different. This is not the passing of age or illness. This is violence, chaos, loss sharpened by the knowledge that the princess was being chased when she died. Outside, the world erupts into grief, raw, immediate, overwhelming. Crowds gather at palace gates even before sunrise, their faces pale in the early light. Someone leaves a bouquet. Someone else leaves a letter. By noon, the railings are buried beneath flowers, thousands of them, spilling onto the pavement in fragrant drifts. The Queen looks out at the spectacle, troubled. Not because she does not grieve, she does in her own quiet, private way, but because she does not yet understand what the nation needs from her. Her instinct, honed by decades of reserve, is to keep the young princes shielded at Balmoral, far from cameras, and to mourn within the family circle. It is a human impulse. It is also a royal miscalculation. In London, the public does not want silence. They want presence. They want emotion. They want the monarchy to stand beside them, not apart from them. When days pass without a statement, the tone of the crowd shifts. Murmurs turn to demands. Headlines sharpen like knives. Where is our queen? Show us you care. The monarchy must answer. Television commentators speak with trembling anger. Radio callers weep openly on air. Outside Buckingham Palace, mourners begin shouting at the empty balcony. Say something. Do something. The monarchy, for the first time in memory, is in danger not from politics or foreign powers, but from public heartbreak. Inside Balmoral, Elizabeth sees the growing firestorm. She watches reports, listens to advisors, reads briefings. She also listens to her grandsons crying softly behind closed doors, their world ripped apart by flashbulbs and a tunnel in Paris. She refuses to thrust them into public spectacle, but she understands that a line has been crossed. The people are not asking for a sovereign. They are asking for a mother's empathy, a grandmother's grief, a human response. And so, slowly, carefully, she changes course. She returns to London. As her motorcade enters the city, crowds gather spontaneously, lining the streets in silence. When she steps out at Buckingham Palace, she walks straight toward the mountains of flowers. No notes, no fanfare, simply a woman moving through grief. She pauses before a card addressed to Diana, the people's princess. Her hand trembles slightly. For the first time, she truly sees the depth of the nation's mourning. And then her face softens. Later that evening, in a rare live broadcast, she speaks directly to the nation. Her voice is steady, but gentler than usual. I admired her, I respected her, I loved her as a daughter-in-law. Millions watch, millions weep. In those words, in that vulnerability, something heals, imperfectly, incompletely, but enough to ease the fracture. Yet the ghost of Diana does not fade. She remains in every camera flash, every newspaper headline, every expectation placed on the monarchy to be warmer, more open, more human. She becomes a mirror the House of Windsor cannot ignore. And in the years that follow, her presence will reshape the institution she once married into, and in part tore open. Because the question left in her wake is not simply one of grief. It is the question that will define the next generation. Can the monarchy survive a world where emotion speaks louder than tradition? Charles III, in The Question of Tomorrow. The rain is light, almost hesitant, as it falls over London on the day the new king first steps onto the balcony as sovereign. The clouds hang low, like a ceiling pulled down over the city. Below, the crowd is a sea of faces, some young, some old, some cheering, some watching in thoughtful silence. Flags flutter. Phones rise like a field of glass petals, capturing every second. Above them all, framed in the familiar stone, stands a man who has waited longer than any heir in British history to reach this exact moment. Charles. He is not young. The lines on his face speak of decades under scrutiny. A boy walking behind his grandfather's coffin, a teenager awkward in school photographs, a prince in conflict-riddled marriage, a widower in the glare of the world's anger, an older man finally married to the woman he loved from the beginning. The public knows almost every of his life, or thinks it does. Beside him stands Camilla, now queen consort, a title that would once have been unthinkable. Her presence is proof that time, persistence, and careful management can soften even the sharpest public judgment. Somewhere behind them are his sons, William and Harry, and the next generation, children who have never known a world without instant news, social media, and the constant hum of global attention. For a moment, as he raises a hand to acknowledge the crowd, Charles seems to listen not only to their voices, but to the echo of ghosts, his mother waving from this same place, his grandfather appearing in uniform, his great-grandfather during another time of war and fear. The House of Windsor is not just stone and ceremony. It is layers of memory stacked upon one another, like pages in a book that has not yet reached its final. Part 1, approximately 700 words. Long before this moment, Charles carried the weight of a crown that had not yet settled on his head. As Prince of Wales, he spent decades walking a tightrope between tradition and change, never quite allowed to be only himself, never quite free to remake the role entirely. He loved landscapes, the curve of a hillside, the pattern of stone walls crossing fields, the feel of rain on old slate roofs. In quiet rooms, he studied architecture and environmental science, seeing connections between human choices and the health of the earth that others were slow to accept. He spoke, early and often, about climate change, conservation, sustainability. For years, some dismissed him as eccentric, a prince talking to plants while the world rushed toward progress. But time shifted the light on his words. What once seemed odd began to look prescient. He built charities, the Prince's Trust and others, that took root in neglected places, offering training, apprenticeship, hope. He visited housing estates scarred by unemployment, inner-city schools starved of resources, rural communities left behind by economic change. Young people who had never met a member of the royal family shook his hand, listened to his slightly hurried speech, heard him ask, "And what do you want to do with your life?" Many never forgot that someone at the very top had paused to listen. Yet no amount of work could fully erase the shadow of his past. For much of his adulthood, Charles was defined in the public mind not by policy or principle, but by a single story, the marriage that broke apart and the woman who died in a Paris tunnel. Diana's ghost walked alongside him wherever he went. Her face appeared on magazine covers decades after her death. Her name floated through interviews, through whispers, through commentary on his every move. When he married Camilla in 2005, the ceremony was deliberately modest, almost understated. No towering cathedral, no vast balcony scene, just a civil service, a blessing, and a quietly determined attempt to step out from the wreckage of the past. It was not a fairy tale. It was something smaller, more human. Two people in late middle age choosing to be together in the full glare of a world that had once vilified them. Slowly, public feeling shifted. Camilla visited charities alone, spoke with victims of domestic violence, supported literacy campaigns. She smiled often, laughed easily, allowed herself to be seen as what she was, imperfect, resilient, ordinary in the ways that matter. The sharp edges of hatred dulled. People began cautiously to accept that the story had not ended in 1997. It had only changed. All this time, Elizabeth remained on the throne. Year after year, Christmas after Christmas, Jubilee after Jubilee, she stood at the center of national ritual like a fixed star. Charles orbited around her, always close to power, never holding it. He attended state openings of Parliament, foreign visits, countless investitures. He shook hands in every corner of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, yet always as the supporting figure, never the main actor. In private, he grew older. His hair thinned. His hands bore the faint swelling of age and strain. He knew that when his time came, he would not have the long runway his mother had. His reign, whenever it began, would be a late, not a sweeping saga. That knowledge gave his future a different weight. There would be less time to make mistakes and less time to repair them. When Elizabeth's health faltered in her final years, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. Charles took on more duties. He represented her at more events. He read more of the speeches once written for her. The country grew used to seeing him in roles that had once been hers alone. It was a soft transition, carefully managed, almost invisible, until the day it was. The end came quietly, as such endings often do. At Balmoral, the Scottish air was clear and cool. The hills rolled away under a sky streaked with autumn light. Inside, the Queen's breathing slowed. The family gathered in ones and twos, moving along corridors she had walked for decades. Charles was no longer simply a son sitting at his mother's bedside. He was also a man about to become king. When the announcement finally broke, when the BBC screens turned black, when the solemn words, "The Queen is dead, long live the King," were spoken, the world felt, for a moment, unmoored. People who had never known a time without Elizabeth II found themselves staring at a new reality. The Second Elizabethan Age had ended. The reign of Charles III had begun. In the first days, he moved like a man in a storm who had been preparing himself for the wind his entire life, and still felt its force more than expected. He walked behind the gun carriage that bore his mother's coffin through London streets lined with motionless crowds. He bowed his head at silent moments that seemed to stretch forever. He shook hands with mourners, eyes red, cheeks wet, who told him again and again how much she had meant to them. "I am deeply aware," he said in his first address, "of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty which have now passed to me." His voice trembled only slightly. Behind the formality ran something rawer, the grief of a man who has lost his mother, and the shock of a successor who has finally become what he was always told he would be. But even in those early days of pageantry and mourning, another reality waited just beyond the edge of the ceremonial frame. Unlike his mother, who stepped into a world still bathed in imperial light, Charles stepped into a world defined by division, digital noise, and distrust of institutions. The question he faced was not only how to honor her legacy, but how to justify the existence of the crown itself in an age that measures value not in tradition, but in utility and authenticity. As the flags rose again to full mast and the black armbands came off, the real test began. What does it mean to be a king in a kingdom that is no longer sure it believes in kings at all? The question does not wait politely at the gates of Buckingham Palace. It pushes its way in through headlines, through interviews, through the ceaseless churn of online commentary. The modern public speaks in real time, collectively, loudly, a chorus of expectation that no monarch before Charles has ever had to answer to so directly. In the days following his accession, Charles walks through the palace's long, echoing corridors with a new gravity. He is familiar with the architecture, with the creak of centuries-old floorboards, with the scent of polished wood and wax, but the weight on his shoulders alters everything. Every step feels measured, as if the marble itself has shifted beneath him. He sees the portraits of past kings and queens, stern faces, embroidered collars, symbols of an era when the monarchy was unquestionable. He pauses, studying them. Their eyes look out impassively, untouched by polls or trending hashtags. They never had to persuade anyone that they were necessary. He does. One morning, sunlight slants across his desk as he reads a briefing about public opinion. The language is clinical, the tone neutral, but the meaning is clear. The monarchy stands on contested ground. Younger generations are uncertain, even indifferent. The Commonwealth, once the empire's softened echo, is restless. Nations debate referendums. Leaders speak openly about Republican futures. Barbados has already stepped away, others may follow. Camilla enters quietly, a cup of tea in her hand. She watches him scan the pages, his brow knitted. She knows that expression. It is the same one he wore as a young man, worrying about a world that rarely listened. Only now the stakes are higher. "You can't be everything to everyone," she says gently. "No," he replies, setting the paper aside, "but I can't be nothing to them either." He rises and moves toward the window. Outside, tourists gather, small as grains of sand from this height. The palace gates gleam in the sun. Somewhere beyond them, the city hums, diverse, restless, impatient. He thinks of his mother's reign, a tapestry woven from ritual and constancy. But the threads of his era are different. He's stepping into a world where institutions are questioned, where deference has dissolved, where power must explain itself. His first major test arrives quickly. A summit of Commonwealth leaders convenes in London, drawing voices from across continents. They gather in a hall filled with polished wood and warm lighting, a room steeped in ceremony but electrified by modern tensions. Charles knows the history in that room. Stories of colonization, struggle, independence movements, cultural wounds still tender. He stands to speak, his notes folded in his hand. For a moment he closes his eyes, recalling the words he has shaped carefully, deliberately. Then he begins. "I cannot pretend that the history we share is without pain," he says. "I can only promise that we acknowledge it, learn from it, and build a future on mutual respect." The room is silent, not because his words are flawless, but because they are different, more direct than any his predecessors might have spoken. When he finishes, several leaders nod slowly. Some remain impassive. One offers a brief but sincere applause. Later, alone in a quiet room, Charles feels the exhaustion seep through him. This is not a reign of stately certainties. It is one of negotiation, emotional, cultural, historical, and it has barely begun. Meanwhile, back in Britain, another storm brews. Harry and Meghan. Their story, unfolding in interviews, documentaries, memoirs, bursts across screens with the force of a global spotlight. Accusations of racism, neglect, institutional rigidity, words sharp enough to pierce even a monarchy accustomed to scrutiny. The House of Windsor is once again split between private pain and public obligation. Charles finds himself navigating territory that is both familial and political, deeply human and impossibly public. At night in his private residence, he sits at a piano he rarely plays. The keys are cool beneath his fingers. He presses a few notes, hesitant, searching, as if trying to find a chord that can contain all the contradictions of his life: duty and regret, hope and history, fatherhood and kingship. The notes fade, leaving only the soft tick of a clock. The question still lingers in the air. Can the monarchy adapt faster than the world demands it to? In quieter corners of Britain, in cafes, buses, kitchens, the public debates, some believe Charles represents continuity. Others see him as a transitional figure between the monarchy of the past and whatever will come after. Many are unsure whether the crown can survive at all in an age of relentless transparency. And through it all, Charles continues, step by step, gesture by gesture, trying to shape a role that has already shaped him. But beyond the debates and the headlines lies a deeper uncertainty. What happens when the last generation raised under Elizabeth's constancy gives way to one raised entirely in the era of doubt? As this question gathers in the collective mind of the nation, Charles prepares for the defining challenge of his reign, one that will not be won with speeches or ceremonies, but with trust rebuilt in fragments and moments. The challenge of proving that a monarchy without empire, without mystique, and without unquestioning loyalty can still find purpose in the century ahead. The test arrives not as a single crisis, but as a sequence of subtle tremors, public shifts, political rifts, cultural awakenings, that together form the landscape of Charles's reign. He faces not one mountain to climb, but a range of smaller peaks, each requiring its own delicate ascent. The first tremor comes from Scotland. For decades, the question of independence has ebbed and flowed like the tide. Now, the waters begin to rise again. Parliament debates. Crowds gather in Glasgow and Edinburgh, holding signs that read a future without the crown beside others proclaiming a nation united. Charles travels north often, walking among the people with understated warmth. He listens more than he speaks, knowing the stakes. The breakup of the United Kingdom would reshape the monarchy's very foundation. During one visit to Balmoral, he speaks privately with a Scottish minister in a drawing room lined with hunting prints and warmed by a flickering fire. "Your Majesty," the minister says, "Scotland's choice will be about identity, not hostility. It may have little to do with you and everything to do with history." Charles nods. "History can be heavy," he replies, "but it can bend, it must bend or it breaks." The minister considers this, then smiles faintly. "We shall see which way it bends." The second tremor comes from within the Commonwealth itself. Caribbean nations debate referendums. Australian politics rekindle Republican sentiment. New Zealand moves quietly toward removing the monarchy from its future constitution. And though these movements are not born of personal rejection, They land with the weight of farewell. In one meeting, a Caribbean leader tells Charles frankly, "Our people respect your family, but respect is not the same as governance. Our independence must be complete." Charles responds with grace. "If departure is your nation's will," he says, "I shall not stand in its way. The bonds between us need not be broken by political change." These words are later praised in editorials as proof of his modern approach to monarchy. But in private, Charles feels the pang of something slipping through his fingers, an inheritance he never wanted to cling to, yet was born into all the same. Then comes the third tremor, quieter, more personal, the growing distance between his sons. He sees it in their stiff public meetings, in the clipped tone of interviews, in the headlines that swing like pendulums between sympathy and scorn. He reads between the lines of Harry's memoir, every ache, every accusation, every echo of Diana's old wounds finding new voice. He tries quietly to mend the breach. Letters are exchanged, phone calls attempted, but reconciliation, he knows, is not an act of sovereignty. It is an act of patience. And some bridges require more time to rebuild than one lifetime can offer. Amid these challenges, Charles continues his work with a steadiness that surprises even those who underestimated him. He advocates for environmental resilience at global conferences, speaking with the urgency of a man who has watched decades pass with too little change. He meets schoolchildren in crowded classrooms, kneels beside them, asks about their dreams with a warmth that softens the stiffness of his role. He speaks to farmers about soil health, to business leaders about ethics, to artists about craft, to the homeless about hope. He does not charm like Diana. He does not mesmerize like Elizabeth, but he engages, sincerely, tirelessly, with a sense of duty shaped not by mystique but by persistence. Still, even as he works, the question of tomorrow sharpens around him. One evening, after a long day of engagements, Charles retreats to a quiet room in Clarence's house. Camilla is reading on a sofa nearby, her glasses low on her nose. The lamps cast soft golden light, turning the room into a cocoon of warmth against the chill outside. Charles sinks into an armchair, rubbing his temples. "Do you ever wonder," he asks in a weary tone, "whether the monarchy is simply an echo, something fading more quietly than anyone wants to admit?" Camilla looks up, her expression gentle. "No," she says, "I think it's a conversation, and conversations change, they don't vanish." He smiles faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. He wants to believe her. He tries to. For the monarchy to endure, it must not only exist, it must matter. And mattering in this century requires something more elusive than ceremony, relevance. The fourth tremor comes in the form of protest. On the morning of High's coronation, long after Elizabeth's era of near-universal affection has passed, signs rise in the crowd. "Not my king. Abolish the monarchy." Their presence is not overwhelming but undeniable. Charles sees them. He hears the chants carried faintly by the wind. He does not flinch, but he does inhale deeply, quietly. He knows it is not personal. He also knows that it is. During the ceremony, as the anointing oil touches his forehead, the weight of the crown is both physical and symbolic. It carries centuries of rule, yes, but also centuries of expectation, contradiction, and unfinished reckonings. He feels the edge of the future pressing against him, asking to be acknowledged. In the weeks that follow, he works with renewed intensity. He shortens certain rituals, modernizes others, streamlines expenses, makes subtle changes to represent a monarchy less rooted in grandeur and more in service. These shifts feel small in isolation. Together, they form a path. But Charles cannot shape the future alone. The true horizon lies in the generation after him. William, the son who stands at the edge of the balcony with a posture more steady than his father's ever was. The son raised in both the glare of celebrity and the shadow of tragedy. The son who knows, intimately, the cost of royalty and the fragility of public love. Charles sees the future when he looks at William, and the future after that when he looks at George, still young, still unburdened. The monarchy, he realizes, will not be defined by whether he succeeds or fails. It will be defined by whether the institution can transform again, shape-shift into something leaner, humbler, more human, without losing the thread that binds past to present. And so, in the quiet of another evening, standing at a window overlooking a city alive with lights and movement, Charles reflects on the he inhabits. He is not the dazzling future. He is the hinge between eras. He is the question mark at the end of a very long sentence. And the final movement of this story, the fate of the House of Windsor in a world that no longer bows easily, will unfold beyond his reign, carried forward by heirs who must face challenges not yet imagined. For now he watches London breathe beneath him, diverse, restless, beautiful, unruly, and wonders, not with fear but with a deep, contemplative hope. The future does not arrive with trumpets or declarations. It comes quietly, like dawn slipping across the Thames, soft and slow, touching stone before it touches skin. And as light settles over London, brushing the roofs of terraced houses, glinting off glass towers, warming the old spires of Westminster, it reveals a truth older than any crown. Nothing endures by standing still. In the long sweep of history, the House of Windsor is a brief flicker, an echo within echoes, but an echo can shape the air long after the sound has faded. From George V forging a new identity in the fire of war, to Edward VII choosing love over throne, to George VI steadying a nation under falling bombs, to Elizabeth II guiding Britain through the end of empire and into the turbulence of the modern world, each monarch bent the arc of their time in ways both grand and intimate. And now, as Charles III walks the narrow ridge between tradition and change, the monarchy stands once more in a moment of uncertainty, a crossroads familiar to history, unfamiliar to the present. The world that watches today is louder, faster, more fractured than the one that crowned his mother. Empires have dissolved, loyalties have shifted, nations have found their own voices. People question what they once accepted. Yet beneath all the complexity, one simple truth persists. The monarchy endures only as long as it reflects the people it serves. Perhaps that is why the House of Windsor has survived when so many dynasties have fallen. Not because its walls are strong, but because its story keeps changing shape to match the age around it, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes painfully, but always eventually. And so we end not with certainty, but with a lingering image. A king at a window, looking out over a city alive with promise and unrest. A prince preparing for a role he did not choose but cannot refuse. A child who may one day inherit a world transformed beyond recognition. And a crown bright, heavy, silent, waiting to see what future hands will make of it. The story of the House of Windsor is not finished. It is simply turning its page. Whether the next brings endurance or reinvention, whether the crown remains a symbol of unity or becomes a relic of another time, will depend not on tradition alone, but on the choices made in the quiet moments, the unseen hours, the human hearts beneath the gold. For in the end, every monarchy is not about power. It is about memory, what a nation chooses to carry forward and what it chooses to let go. And somewhere beyond the horizon where history meets tomorrow, the echoes continue.